Take a person, take a story, take you on a journey. It's your take.
On today's Your Take, I'm joined by a professional cinematographer. My guest was inspired by his father, who was a photographer, and had early ambitions to be a magician, cartoonist, performer, and even a puppeteer. My guest made his first films on an 8mm camera and would venture into the creative world, having studied drawing and painting before going on to specialise in film. After moving to Bristol, my guest teamed up with friend Dave Borthwick to form the film collective Bolex Brothers. Throughout the 1980s, they would make short films, music promos, TV title sequences, and help put Bristol animation on the map. In the mid-80s, my guest began his professional association with Aardman Animations. That association has gone on to create an impressive body of work. Peter Gabriel Sledgehammer music video, Nick Park's Creature Comforts, The Wrong Trousers, A Close Shave, A Matter of Loaf and Death, and Curse of the Were-Rabbit. He was also cameraman on Aardman's first feature, Chicken Run, the Shaun the Sheep TV series and the 2 movies, the Pirates feature, and the Netflix TV short, Robin. He's currently working on the Chicken Run sequel and preparing as director of photography on the new Wallace and Gromit feature. Today I'm joined by Dave Alec Riddett. We discuss his early life, influences and love of film, his break as a cinematographer in the animation business back in the 1980s, together with his plans for the future. A very warm good evening.
Good evening to you.
A fellow Bristol resident, and like yourself, I'm a huge lover of cinema, and I'm looking forward to the next hour discussing our kind of shared love of world cinema, and also to kind of experience your journey throughout your life and what you've achieved in your career, which is incredible. Just going from my introduction, the amount of projects you've worked on. Dave, I wanted to kind of go back to the beginning, if you don't mind, and turn the clock back to a long time ago, to the 1950s.
That was a long time ago.
It was a very long time ago. November the 25th, 1954, you were born, and you're brought up in the village of Great Bowden in Leicestershire. I wanted to ask your memories of childhood, and do you have siblings?
Right. Well, I tell you, I had an idyllic childhood. I loved it so much, which gave me a good outlook on life in general. I mean, I enjoyed that so much. I've continued enjoying my life up till now. Yeah, so I was born in Leicester. I was born in my nan's house in a little tiny street. It's like Coronation Street, I used to think it was when I was a kid. It was, in fact, it was decorated very much like Wallace's house. It's just my nan's collection of old ceramic knickknacks and things, a tiled fireplace. But it's a back street of Leicester. My parents, my wonderful parents, and again, such a great influence on me. My parents were not very well off, but very creative. I mean, we moved from Leicester for quite early on. I think it was in 1958 we moved into this little village, Great Bowden, in an old thatched cottage. It wasn't thatched at the time. It was so run down. It had a tin roof on it. They didn't have a lot of money, and in those days, that's the sort of thing you could buy. Nowadays, it was worth a fortune, I should think. But, so I had my brother and myself. I had a younger brother, 5 years younger than me. Lovely guy, Mick. So we were brought up in this little village, in this little old cottage. Not a lot of space in it, but a lot of space around us. I mean, it's in the countryside, so it's very open territory for playing. And a lovely little village school there as well. And I'll say all the while, because my parents, being quite creative themselves, were very encouraging. And even the first school I went to, this little village school, there must have been about, I don't know, maybe 60 at the most of children in this whole school. we were always encouraged to play music and put on plays and do all sorts of things. Quite early on, I got into doing little puppet shows. Every Friday at assembly, we were allowed to do a little performance. So we'd either play like a ukulele or recorder or do a little puppet show. And I sort of got a bug for showing off at an early age. My parents were very into the theatre. And the whole of the social life, I think, in around Great Bowden was next to a little town called Market Harborough. And Market Harborough had a theatre. I called it an amateur dramatic theatre, as it wasn't professional theatre, but the productions they did there were far from sort of am-dram. There's a great place. My father practically lived there half the time. He loved it. But he got into theatre quite early on. I think he met my mother, or they certainly toured together in a little concert party. He used to travel around Leicestershire in a bus, performing at village halls, etc. So they were very into the theatre. And he became the sort of art director of this local theatre. So I would spend a lot of time there in my early years, up to my late teens, actually helping him in the theatre. He encouraged me to perform there. He used to design all the brochures. He designed a lot of the theatre itself. He did a lot of the sets for the shows, as well as performing. And he was a great performer as well, as was my mother. My mother did a lot of the costume designs for theatre. So my sort of social life growing up was nice, running around this lovely village, but there was this sort of hub of creativity around the theatre, which I'm sure shaped a lot of the things I did later on. Also, my father was a painter, a designer, and a photographer, an incredibly good photographer, and eventually he became a theatre photographer for quite a time. So he managed to marry all his sort of creative desires into a quite unusual lifestyle, I will say. He was never satisfied with staying at one job for very long. He was always doing something. But yeah, for his theatre, photography, his painting. And I think that's quite an inspiration to me as well, actually, is that idea that you could indulge yourselves in things you liked and hopefully were good at. So yeah, it was an incredible start for me. Yeah.
It kind of leads on beautifully to kind of my next question, because you painted this portrait of this kind of idyllic family life coming from a very stable and lovable family.
Yeah.
And you've spoken about all these creative things going on in your life and helping your dad at the theatre in his job. I want to kind of touch on that relationship, because I think that's kind of key to your career and your path, your chosen path into the creative industries. How big an influence was your father on your interests and early ambitions? And what kind of things were you watching and seeing that kind of acted as a catalyst to want to actually work in the arts?
Right. Well, I say it did incredible influence, because he just loved doing stuff. He loved creating stuff. He loved making pictures, and that's why I got my great love of making pictures. I suppose the big difference was he really took his into theatre or in stills photography. He was never that interested in cinema. That's something I picked up myself, really. And obviously he was able to teach me about the rudiments of photography. He had his darkroom in a shed at the bottom of the garden. When he wasn't in there, I'd sneak in there and I'd be printing photographs. Say he was doing a lot of portrait. He did a lot of portrait work. He was very good at that. But eventually he was doing a lot of theatre work. So I was always surrounded by pictures just all over the place. But I sort of got into that at one point of I suppose actually using photography to tell stories a bit more than he would, really. I was very into cartooning as well. I love comic books. And I tried drawing my own comic books. It was usually a rip-off of the Beano or whatever, or sort of the sci-fi programs on television at the time. But then I got the idea of what I was actually taking photographs, and I started taking photographs of my Action Man figures, the 12-inch dolls. And I used to do little stories there, which I did in stills, which at the time I didn't realize is sort of what what I'm doing now, but it's like making storyboards with photography. So that sort of, through my father's love of photography and teaching me that was a good starting point.
I wanted to touch upon your schooling, and I wanted to ask, where did you go to school, and do you have kind of fond memories from your time there? And secondary to that, I wanted to ask what subjects you excelled in, and whilst at school, did you have ambitions to go to art school?
Yes, I think I always thought about going to art school from an early age, because that's my father did that. He got himself apprenticed at an early age with a design company who actually put him through Leicester College of Art in the days before grants and things. I thought that was the way you did it. So I knew about art colleges. I knew there's an opportunity to go to learn more about the arts after school. But I say the juniors, the infant school I was at to start with were very encouraging for performing and creating things. They had their own kiln, for example. We did pottery. And the middle school I went to in Market Harborough was a bit more severe, I suppose, in the academic sort of side of things. I was never that good at a lot of the academics. History and geography and things I was terrible at. Strangely enough, history, I love history now, but geography I'm still bad at. But the art side of it, I suppose I always picked up on the art side and music. But it was later on, we talk about influence of school. I don't know what sort of influence I had on, on my schools. Later on, I went to what was Market Harborough Grammar School. I think it became comprehensive while I was there. And it got a bit unruly, actually, I think, because of that. Because as prefects in our sixth form, they just used to leave us to it. And that was about the time I was very keen on making movies. I had got my own little camera. I had been making movies at home. And again, animating my action man figures. I'd actually learned what animation was quite early on. But I remember at the grammar school, the high school as it was then, I and some friends in the sixth form common room decided to make a film. During the process of which it was a parody of, I think, Voice of the Bottom of the Sea, which is a sci-fi TV serial at the time. We thought, well, we could make, so I could understand how the special effects on that work. If you move the camera to the right, everyone moves to the left, it looks like you're in a sinking submarine. And another friend of mine was very keen on making explosives. So anyway, to cut a long story short, during the making of this little film we did in the common room, I think we almost set fire to it. In fact, we blew a cupboard up, filled the place with smoke, and we had all the teachers running over to the sixth form common centre, which is slightly separate to the school, with fire extinguishers. And I had to explain what was going on. And at first point, I said, oh, well, we were making a film, one of the lights exploded. And they said, I don't think that's quite right, Riddett, is it? And I said, no, we were actually doing some special effects, and it sort of got a bit out of hand. Now, I thought I was going to get expelled for this, because this was quite a serious breach of safety, I suppose. But they were very interested that I was making a film. So they said, well, you ought to do this through the school properly. And we do actually have a camera here, which at that point I wasn't allowed to use, but they said I could actually make a film, which I proceeded to do, and then blew up a bit more of the school. This time, though, I actually made a model of the school, and it's my first idea of making special effects, very crude, but all of that sort of came out. You were asking about what influenced me. I mean, a lot of the things that influenced me as an early age on television was things like, well, originally Supercar, Stingray, Fireball XL5, which were basically puppet-orientated programs, but had some fantastic miniature work. Later on, I learned that the guy behind it, a guy called Derek Meddings, as a special effects master, was behind a lot of this stuff that I thought was fantastic, and I thought I'd love to be doing something like that. So the first time I got my rocks off, I suppose, was actually building a model of the school and destroying it. But yeah, that was the sort of influences I had, I say, from television, were those sort of programs. I mean, I do understand later on that Jerry Anderson wasn't really into his puppet stuff probably as much as the viewing public was, because I think he wanted to make live action films. But I thought, this playing with miniatures, etc., and even just the stylization of puppets as characters, I thought was fantastic. So there's an early inkling of what was going to go on later in my life in that.
I totally share your love of the Supercar. I think it's a tremendous early puppet program.
Yeah, I think the earlier ones was perhaps better. I mean, Thunderbirds was all right, and they got very sophisticated toward the end, but there's a certain style of those early ones, and especially at the age I was, certainly Fireball XL5 came out. I thought it was marvelous, you know, what, yeah, and you could almost see how it's done, but yeah, so it felt like, oh, I could do something like that. I could make some models, and I could film them.
After your early experiments in filmmaking and blowing up the school, you would leave your school after your tenure there, and you go on to study for quite some time at various art colleges. You went to Loughborough College, film at Leeds College of Art,
Yep.
and eventually to study radio, film and television here in Bristol, where you're based now.
Yeah.
What was your overall experience like at those art colleges, and what did it teach you about yourself and disciplines such as photography, editing, animation, and sound?
Quite different from each college. In those days, to do an art college degree, you had to do a foundation course, which I did at Loughborough, which was the nearest college. Loughborough was an incredible art college. The foundation course there, it's just a one-year course. It was all about the basics. And although I'd sort of excelled, I think from my background at art at school, I mean, that's where my talents lay. I think the process they had at Loughborough was to try and unlearn all the badness before you entered the world of actually art proper. Like, it's not all about shading, it's not all about being clever and that, it's actually getting right down to the basics. It's marks on paper. You know, this is the thing. I mean, the people running the course there were incredible. They're very dedicated artists themselves, but there's a very good team there. And they really spent that year breaking you down and getting you down to absolute basics of creating images. And that taught me so much, really. I mean, A-level art at school at that time was powder paint, pretty cut. Yeah, it wasn't very deep. And Loughborough taught me so much about, you know, draftsmanship. It was bloody hard work. I mean, they really put you through it. You worked all through the day and a lot of evening classes. You'd be working on one drawing until you'd actually gone and been rubbing it out and erasing it. They'd come around and say, you can't see that, that doesn't exist there. Take that out and, you know, just draw what you can see. You'd be through the paper onto the drawing board, yeah, by the end of the evening. You'd erased it so much and corrected things. And they had a sort of a technique at the towards the end of the year, when you had to apply for your next art college. They go through your work with you. We used to have a big pile of work that we've done for the year, and they go through it and say to you, this is quite good, this is rubbish, this is rubbish, this is not, I don't know what you thought. Can you defend why you did this? And you'd have a pile left there, and they said, what do you think of this one? I said, well, I'm quite pleased with that one. She said, yeah, you learned a lot from that one. You don't need any more. That can go out. And you'd end up with about 6 pieces of work at the end of it. And they say, right, you're applying for your next college soon. You've got sort of about 6 weeks. You better get some work done. Yeah. And you really worked. You really worked hard, and it was very precise work you were doing. You couldn't piss around. And subsequently, it was very easy to get into the next art college, because I think that the Loughborough people did incredibly well. They were well grounded in basically what is taking you back to ground zero, and then you can start specialising what you want to do. And they definitely wouldn't allow me to do film when I was at Loughborough. Yeah, I said, oh, I quite like to do film. I said, well, you can't do that yet. You're not ready yet. Yeah, let's get you down to the basics. Because of that, I chose Leeds as my next art college, because I had heard they got a very good film department. They had a lot of film equipment. Sorry, you're about to ask.
Yeah, sorry, you carry on. My apologies.
Yeah, so I applied for Leeds, got in there. Leeds, fantastic place. I love being in Leeds. It's the first time I spent that much time in a big city. It's a lovely place, especially in the 70s. The punk movement there, that was quite enlightening. The course itself there was quite laid back. I mean, I'll say it's so different to Loughborough. The first year again was sort of basic stuff, typography and general art stuff, and then the second and third year you could choose to specialise. So that's when I moved into the film department there. And again, some nice tutors there. There's a sort of guy who did mentor me, a guy called Adrian York, who was one of the tutors there. He helped me immensely, but generally they didn't force things on you. They didn't, it wasn't intense learning course. They had a rostrum camera. They had lots of Bolex cameras, which I was quite pleased with. Harryflex cameras. They had a good range of equipment, but basically left you to it, which is something I quite enjoyed, actually. I do enjoy teaching myself as much as being taught, and just give me some equipment to play with. Yeah, and I'm as happy as anything. And that was sort of what it was like. We made a few films together, a group of us at Loughborough. I think my final film was a thing called So You Want to Make Movies, which is I first stab at doing some animation, some 2D animation, with a lot of COD silent movie stuff in there. It was supposed to be a sort of a piss take of how movies were developed, narrated by animated characters and telling us the history of how humans made films. But not the greatest film in the world, but it was a good learning process then. But I say with not a lot of strict tuition now. I mean, it was very much work it out for yourself. And subsequent to that, Adrian was my sort of mentor there. He'd started out at Bristol, in the Department of Drama, back in the 60s, where a guy called Professor George Brandt who was a professor of drama, but he was very, very keen on films. And at that point in the 60s, he was trying to start a film course, which Adrian had done, my mentor. And he said, you must go down to Bristol. He said, this is a fantastic course. It is now an official film course. It's a postgraduate course. He said, you would love it. And I was sort of semi-convinced, but at the time I thought, well, I've been at Art College for 4 years. I didn't know whether they wanted to carry on. I said, well, I'll give it a go. And I applied and I got in, but rather stupidly, I said, well, actually, I would like to take some time off and do some other things, before I go back into higher education. So I sort of said no at that point. And so it went, and I was doing a bit of freelance work in Leeds and a little bit back in Leicester. And about a month before the course was due to start, I got another call from them saying, look, somebody, we know you didn't want to come, but somebody we'd chosen. It was a very limited, because only about 10 people on the course has dropped out, but we would really like you to do it. Would you reconsider? And I thought, well, if I say no again, they'll never ask me again. So I said, yeah, okay, I'll come and join you. Yes, and I'm so glad I did, because it was one of the best years of my life in terms of what I'd learned in film. And also I got to meet the guy I did a lot of work with, Dave Borthwick, who's a fellow student on that course. So I say it was, I'm so glad I actually chose to go that year. It's a very productive year.
I'm going to come on very shortly and talk about your relationship with Dave Borthwick and obviously the early part of your career going on to form Bolex Brothers. But before I do so, I was going to ask you, am I correct that when you did the Bristol course, you were also on the same course as the filmmaker Alex Cox, who would go on to obviously become a British indie filmmaker and also go to Hollywood as well?
Oh, yeah. Not that particular year. I knew Alex because he was the year before. So when I went down, I met Alex because when I went down to apply for the course, yes, he was the year before us. But as you say, I mean, there's quite a lot of noted filmmakers that have gone through that course. And subsequently, because I ended up working there for several years afterwards, which I can go and tell you a bit about later. But
I was going to move on, if you don't mind, and talk about very much kind of the early part of your career. And I think we're looking sort of at the early 1980s. Can you tell us how you met Dave Borthwick and what made you decide to open your own studio under the name Bolex Brothers? And can you tell us about some of the early challenges in opening a studio and talk about some of the early short films, music promos and TV title sequences you made under the Bolex umbrella?
Sure. Well, it wasn't really like opening a studio at all. No, I mean, I think that sounds grander than it sort of was at the time. So Dave and myself met on the RFT course. We obviously gelled together. We were interested in the same sort of things, and doing fairly experimental filmmaking and quite bizarre filmmaking, as it turned out to be. So when we left the course, I mean, I was freelancing for a while. for about a year or so. I ended up doing all sorts of things. I was painting fairground rides for for a short time. Worked in a comic book shop for a while. Because it was quite difficult at that point to get into the film industry. Back in those days, you'd have to remember the ACTT. You couldn't get into the ACTT unless you had a job. You couldn't get the job. It's, the old catch-22. It was an odd industry to try and get into legitimately. And Dave was finding the same sort of thing as well. But Dave started doing a few bits for the BBC. I got asked to go back to join the RFT course as a sort of technical tutor, which is, again, a great opportunity. So basically, I was put in charge of all the equipment, and I would supervise the student shoots there. I would teach them how to use the equipment. And it also gave me a bit of spare time. I mean, the long holidays and that. They said I could borrow the equipment, etc. So I could actually, as well as doing freelance jobs in the downtime, I could actually indulge myself in making movies. And the same thing for Dave. Dave slightly later joined the University Audiovisual Aids Unit. So we were working in the same building and basically taking the opportunity in our spare time to try and make movies together. The early ones were like pixelation. Maybe you understand pixelation is animating human beings. Basically, because we had no money, had no sets, we had very little equipment. So I think our first films were pixelated. We found some people who could bear to be animated, who could hold poses for one frame at a time. And that was sort of the basis of our first films together. Because I was working at the university, I did have I could afford to buy a little bit of equipment, which is the things like the camera I always wanted was a Bolex camera. I mean, from when I was a kid, I'd heard about it. I mean, growing up in this little village, I'd read all these magazines, American magazines, like monster movie magazines, and quite often they had stories about kids making films on their Bolex camera. And I thought, how the fuck do you get it? I can't afford one of those. Where'd you get them from? So it wasn't until art college I could actually get to use a proper Bolex camera. So while I was in the university, as well as using their gear, I actually started collecting Bolex equipment because it was so cheap. I mean, it was straight, even then back in the 80s, you could buy a Bolex camera for 100 quid maybe, yeah. I mean, quite an old one, but yeah, a serviceable one, which started my interest in Bolex cameras. And being an avid collector, I was just collecting loads of them and loads of accessories for them because it was an affordable camera and it was a camera that did everything.
I wanted to.
So these early films that Dave and myself were making were shot on these Bolex cameras. So I was just to continue, that's sort of why we became the Bolex Brothers. I mean, at a point we were making, I think we'd done, there was one project we had, which was a TV titles. Yes, it was the title sequence for a Welsh TV program, and they said at the end, "Well, we can't name you individually. What's your company called? What are you called?" And at that point, we were just like, I say, a collective. It was Dave and myself to start with, and a few other people joined us. And so I sort of thought, well, because I love the Bolex so much, and we're brothers in filmmaking. Yeah, we'll be the Bolex Brothers. That's how the name came about.
So it's a great name, and I want to stick on the theme of Bolex and your love of Bolex cameras. And I wanted to ask you, what are your favorite projects you worked on at Bolex and why? And can you tell us how many Bolex cameras you've owned over the many years? And do you still have all of them?
Yeah, more Bolexes than sense, I think people have said. I've had, I think there's about 28 of them at one point. I've still got a few. There's a few I can see littered around me here still, but yes, quite a few of them. What was the other part of the question?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about some of the favorite projects you worked on whilst you and Dave worked together at Bolex Brothers.
Yeah. Well, as you say, working together at Bolex Brothers, I mean, I say it was just an ephemeral thing to start with. It wasn't until later, I mean, when Dave went on to do the feature film is when they cemented or even registered the name Bolex Brothers. So in the early days, it was a sort of collective term for a group of people making films. A lot of which, to start with, I mean, when I left the university, department of drama, to go completely freelance, I did at the point I managed to get a mortgage on a house. I found a house with a good basement in it, and that became our sort of headquarters for a while. So yeah, that was that was the company. It was a basement in my little terraced house. But we did a lot of films in there, a lot of little projects. Several for the BBC as a thing called I can't remember what it's called now. The Golden Oldie Picture Show. That was it. Yeah. If you did you recall that? It might be before your time.
I think it's before my time.
But basically the BBC. I mean, it was a cheap way of getting people to make films for them, as because they had the copyright on lots of pop songs. And so get somebody in. They got Dave in to direct some live action ones, and then I joined in to do some sort of animated ones. Whether you get something like I Feel Free by the Cream, and we just make a little, basically like a pop video for it. And we did several of those. Grass Grow was a particular favourite. But also interesting as well, because quite often those early ones involved my action men again. I think I've still got an action figure behind me somewhere. I think which I had when I was about 11 years old. It's probably been in several of my films, and it's become a star in his own right. Because again, it was something easy to animate. And we do like a mixture of pixelation again on a lot of these films, and have human beings actually almost turning into little action figures, playing with the scale of things. So they were all quite experimental, and we also did a lot for a local band called the Startled Insects. At the time, we were doing some amazing stage shows, quite visual stage shows, and they wanted some visuals to project. So we did one film for them, which they projected live on stage. And then because they were with Island Records wanted to bring out a very early sort of video CD. Yeah. And they had about 4 tracks, I think it was. So they actually had a budget. Now, we were doing lots of films with hardly any money at all. The BBC paid very little. And we'd done some for other bands we managed to get together for like £1,000, which at the time seemed a lot, but didn't really cover the processing costs. So everything else you sort of had to, you had to beg, borrow, or steal. But because they had a contract with Ireland, we had a reasonable amount of money, and we did four animated film, short films to their music tracks, which were incredibly enjoyable, and it sort of became the basis, I think, later on for what Dave was doing with Secret Adventures of Tom Thumb. Yeah, a lot of the techniques we evolved in there, and again, all the techniques we had were based on what we could get away with without having a budget, really. I mean, a lot of props and the storylines for these films were just objects that people had given to us. Like the band says, well, we've got a load of rubber rats here. We've got all these, or we use eyeballs as part of our imagery on stage. We've got these little glass eyes. Can you use these? And so we'd write the scripts around what we had. So it wasn't like, as I tell everybody nowadays, when you make an animated film, you should plan it meticulously beforehand, storyboard it, because you can't go wrong. And that, in fact, we were doing the exact opposite then. We just say, right, we've got this bag of rats, so we'll do a sequence with rats running over a living room table. We've got these eyeballs. Well, we'll build these into trees, and then because we got these bits of an old tree there, we built a little set. We just stay up all night just making stuff, and then trying to work out what the story was, which is an exciting way of making quite surreal films. I'm quite proud. I'm really proud of the films we did back then, just because it was, it's like us emptying the contents of our head, really. Yeah,
I'm a huge fan of the Bolex work, and got tremendous admiration for what you did. And I've seen some of the short films that you made, and they've stood the test of time, and incredibly experimental, and very adult themed as well.
Yes, I think they certainly weren't for kids.
I kind of wanted to move away from Bolex and kind of talk about the next chapter in your career, the next phase. We're kind of looking, I guess, the mid-1980s, when you began your professional association and relationship with Peter Lord and Dave Sproxted of Aardman Animations. How did you meet Pete and Dave, and how did the opportunity come about to work at Aardman? And can you recall the first projects you worked on?
Yes, indeed. I'd known Pete and Dave, since when I first came to Bristol, because of a associate, somebody who was a year ahead of me when I was at Leeds, Andy Walker, he'd mentioned these people, and I think that was a sort of introduction to them. So I met them quite early on. They were two guys in a two-room studio doing Morph. And this is like 77, 78 when I came to Bristol. When I'd finished the film course in 78, I say part of the freelance work I got a little bit of work doing some paint and trace for the Sex Pistols film, The Great Rock and Roll Swindle.
Oh, wow.
It was one of the guys directing us the animated sequences for it. It was in Bristol. So I spent several weeks, because he knew Pete and Dave very well. He said, oh, I know some animators here, they're doing more, but they got a little bit of space in their studio. So me and another graduate from Leeds, we were installed in there for several weeks, painting green vomit half the time, I think. There's a scene where the Sex Pistols throw up at Heathrow Airport, which they hadn't any footage of, so they wanted to do it in cartoons. So yeah, so I was doing paint and trace while these guys were trying to work out the next episode of Morph and how they could take the company further. And I think at the time they were approached by Roger Law from Spitting Image. I mean, I remember being there while I was doing some of this paint and trace, and behind me was a model of a politician that they'd sculpted, and they'd asked Pete and Dave to see if they could animate it. The outcome was that they said, yes, we could, but it would take a month to do like a few seconds of material. So Roger Law went off and then redesigned his stuff as puppets. Anyway, for the next few years, and I was working at the university, I'd pop in and see Pete and Dave, so I'd see what they were up to, but they weren't really doing any commercial work until about 1984, I suppose it was. I was still working for the University Department of Drama then, but they asked me just to help out on one commercial. I think they were hiring some equipment from London, and because they knew I knew a fair bit about film, etc., and also because I had a van, I think, they said, would you mind going up to London to pick up this gear? Well, it's 35mm gear. And I said, sure, yeah. So I went up to JDC in London and collected this gear and brought it back down. They'd hired in a professional film crew because they didn't really, they weren't really au fait with all the techniques at that point. So that was the first sort of time I'd worked with them. I say I was just driving a van really, and sorting out the gear for them. But subsequently, when I left the university, I'd get asked to come and lend a hand on the odd commercial they're doing. And Dave Sproxton was lighting at the time. And eventually I took over a lot of the lighting on those early TV commercials. And there was quite a few for Scotch Tape and Capri Sun is also, They were just starting to get momentum now because their short films have been so successful that all the agencies in London were saying, well, hang on, these people could be doing commercials for us. And the London agencies loved coming down to Bristol, getting out of London and coming down to Aardman's. So they were picking up a lot of commercial work. And roughly around that same time, I got offered to shoot across the Atlantic in a small yacht. Which I took on, and it was about 27 days at sea with 2 clockwork wind-up Bolexes, making this little documentary. We got to the Caribbean. I spent a little bit of time there, and I got a call from my father called. Well, I spoke to my father from the Caribbean, and he said, "Oh, he says your mates Pete and Dave have been trying to get hold of you." He said, "Did you want to work on a music video for Peter Gabriel?" He said, "I think you like Peter Gabriel, don't you? I seem to recall." And I said, "Yeah." I said, that sounds like a good project. So I hot-footed back to the UK as soon as I could. So that became one of the first big projects, I suppose, or known projects, with the Sledgehammer video. But by that point, I had worked on quite a few commercials with them there.
That leads nicely to my next question, and it was going to be on your work on the seminal Sledgehammer video, obviously for Peter Gabriel, which, if you look back sort of 35 years later, it's still very much revered and stood the test of time. Yeah. But I wanted to ask, what were the challenges making that video? And can you kind of discuss how it was made and the filming techniques involved? And then lastly, I was going to ask you why you think it stood the test of time and it's still revered today and kind of hailed as one of the groundbreaking sort of videos of the MTV VH1 era.
Yeah, we did indeed. A few months back, I did an interview for some big rock magazine, and they voted it #1. I want to do it, and again, it keeps cropping up. People want to do little features on it. There is actually a documentary that Dave Sproxton has made, which is yet to be released, which would be will spill the whole of the beans. But yeah, it was great to do. It was very spontaneous, and I think that's why it's had a lasting appeal. It was sort of quite simple to shoot, really, because it's you can see how it's done. It's sort of obvious, but you look at it and you think, God, how would anybody put themselves through that? And Peter Gabriel was amazing, really. I mean, I was sort of brought in, I suppose, because I'd had a lot of experience with pixelation, and basically it is pixelation. It's animating a human or applying animation to be human. The things we did to Pete Gabriel, I mean, were appalling, really. It sort of was based on some work that Steve Johnson, the director, an American guy who'd done a lot of animated films, a lot of pixelated films in the States. He'd done something for Talking Heads. Pete Gabriel's seen that and asked him if he'd do something similar for him. Then they had to find a production company, and Aardman's name came up. So that's how it got off the ground. But the actual storyboarding of it to start with was quite basic. I mean, I seem to remember a lot of it was just like it's on the back of an envelope. You know, so somebody scribbled some ideas out. So there was quite a few ideas going around. And for example, at one point, so Steve Johnson, the director, had said, "Oh, I want a baby elephant. Can you get this an elephant?" And we asked the zoo, yes, if they'd lend us a baby elephant. They said, of course, no. He says, no, Steve, I don't think, we can get one of those. It's what's something else do? And he says, okay, get some chickens. Can you get some chickens? I said, well, we can make you some chickens, something like animatable chickens. He says, no, just like in the supermarket, but take the polythene off. And literally, that sort of happened. We had to work out a sequence. So somebody went out and got some oven-ready chickens from the freezer and put a metal armature inside, some bendy wire, which poor old Nick had to animate. In fear of his life, I think he thought he was going to get salmonella poisoning from 3 days under hot lights animating real chickens. But there was a lot of things like that. It was just crazy stuff, really. It didn't seem to have a lot of planning. Obviously, it did have. I was sort of in charge of the cameras then. I had to find out a way of rigging Peter so that we could actually animate things on top of him without him moving too much. I had an old cinema seat, which had come from my father's theatre. It was like a prototype one. And I thought, well, that's quite a tight fit. So we brought that into the studio and put a little neck brace on the back of it. And that's where Pete spent a lot of the week. Sandwiched into this chair with a neck brace on there, where we did so appalling things to him, like paint his face and build train sets around his head and animate them around. I say the technique is pretty obvious if you look at it there, but I say it is so it's so wild, really, and that's that's the joy of it as well. It's sort of quite spontaneous looking. It is slightly ragged. The big disappointment for us on that one is that when we took it on, we thought, this is great. We can do all of these things in camera. So everything you see is like what's actually happening in front of the camera. Mm. Sadly, at the end of it, Steve Johnson, the director, did change his mind on certain things. So they did a video transfer of the film. It's all shot on 35mm film. He did a video transfer and they did some video edits to it. So at that point, the final results only existed as a video edit, which lost a lot of quality. We have since restored it. We've gone back to the original negatives and done a restoration, or Dave Sproxton and another team have actually gone back and tried to restore it. So it actually, there's a version of it now which is actually true to its original 35mm form. One of the jobs I had to do was make sure that that Peter's always registered exactly in frame, because obviously over a day he'd got to leave his chair, had to go to the loo, come back, and we had to re-register him. And we did that we didn't have the technology now of digital stuff. It was basically it was a very crude video assist attached to camera. That's the only reason we could see what we were doing. It was rather than looking through the viewfinder. So the initial shot I took of him, we actually cut out this bit of film, and you could slide it into the viewfinder in the film camera, and I was using that to line Pete up every time. So that was one of the main jobs at the beginning of the day and through various points of the day, is actually realigning everything. And we had him lying under a rostrum camera later on. So the brothers Quay, noted filmmakers, had come down and they were constructing the wooden doors and things in front of his face. So the majority of it was six days of shooting, mostly in the Aardman studio in Clifton, very small studio at the time. And then the final 2 days was we went into the University Drama Department's theatre and did the dance sequence. We had to use the theatre because we wanted backdrops that came down, and the backdrops were actually changing frame by frame as well. So the wallpaper was dancing in the background. Yeah, there's quite a lot of absurd techniques going on in that film, but they were all very basic and very theatrical. That's why it's a joy. With Steve Johnson was making a lot of it up as he went along, really. Even the dance sequence there, I had to work out all the camera moves almost live, frame by frame. You know, we would have a camera on the dolly, and he'd say, "Okay, well, Pete was dancing one frame at a time like this." He'd say, "Right, I want you to zoom in onto him now," or basically dolly in. So I had to keep marking out bits on the floor. This is live while he's getting his position. His next position, right, move the camera. Crazy stuff. And at one point, we got in a load of dancers from a youth club in St. Paul's, I think. And they were taught to do all these movements in one frame at a time and dance around while he was in the front. And after a while, they were just saying, "We can't do this. We can't keep this up anymore. We're too tired." We said, "You can't stop, because we're doing this in real time almost." I mean, broken down one frame at a time, but we were doing it continuous. So we had to actually animate chairs in. You'll notice if you watch the video, at some point some chairs mysteriously move in, and then all the dancers sit down. This is because they just couldn't keep it up. So that was that's basic. That was spontaneous. That was written. Thinking, how are we going to carry on? Okay, well, somebody animate these chairs in quick, one frame at a time. But yeah, it is. It's full of life. The whole thing is full of life because I think it's the way it was constructed. It wasn't overthought. It was it just went for it.
I want to next kind of jump forward in time in terms of the time frame, and I want to go on to Aardman's first animated feature film, which is Chicken Run.
Yeah.
You were senior director of photography. What was the experience like photographing your first feature film, and how did the process differ from working on all your previous other projects, such as the short films, music videos, idents, etc.?
Well, in fact, the Wallace and Gromit really is what it led from. I mean, it was an incredibly steep learning curve to Chicken Run, to do something on that scale, for, which has been international showing and on the big screen. I mean, when we did Wrong Trousers, I mean, it was a very small team. There's only about 6 of us generally on the studio floor doing that film. There was 2 of us doing the camera work, 2 people animating, a production manager, and a set builder, dresser. I mean, there are obviously people behind the scenes doing quite a few other things, but generally on the floor, very few people. We realized you couldn't really make a big film on that level. So when we did Close Shave, we started a little training course and got in more animators. I think we had up to 8 animators on Close Shave. Again, I led a team of about, there was myself and 3 other lighting camera people, and we started having camera assistants, which we didn't have, and sparks as well, which we really didn't have a lot of the time on Wrong Trousers. So gradually we were building up after Close Shave, and there was always an idea, it'd be lovely to make a feature film. And that opportunity started to materialize after Close Shave, and we'd sort of got into the idea of building up teams and training people up. Because you imagine, I mean, people did all sorts of things. I mean, I've done a bit of set building and a bit of animation even on Wrong Trousers. Not the character stuff, but that's the way you could do it in the old days. But you realized you've got to specialize thoroughly if you're going to make a big feature film. So a very big learning curve on that, on actually getting the right people in, training people up, being able to have animators who go in mob-handed. And this is the way we make animated films now. You have to have a lot of people, a lot of animators, because it takes so much time. What was it? Because on Wrong Trousers, well, about the 6 of us there, I think we were shooting for about 14 months on that. We managed to get it down to about 9 months for close shave to do a half hour. But to do a full-on feature film, you need a lot of people, a lot of highly trained people. So, I mean, yes, it's a big learning curve. We spent certainly 2 years before we even started trying to prep for equipment. Tom Barnes, the technical director, and myself, we traveled all over the place, the States a lot, buying up old cameras, looking at different bits of equipment, going to trade shows to see what was available, because we were obviously not experienced in feature film production. And in fact, we were experiencing something that nobody else was, which is stop frame animation. There wasn't really a precedent for what we were doing. I mean, there'd been films like Nightmare Before Christmas, I suppose, but there wasn't a great history of feature filmmaking in stop frame. So we were sort of left our own devices, but had to learn a lot of things very quickly. Unfortunately, because the backing we had from DreamWorks and Pathé, we had a good budget to start with, because basically we had to build a studio, not only create a film, we had to find new premises, which is the Aztec Studios on the outskirts of Bristol, we found. We had to kit it out, put lighting grids in there, put new facilities in there for making props and stuff, but buying a hell of a lot of film equipment. And up to that point, we'd been using a very odd mixture of film cameras. We were shooting most things on 35mm from very early on. All the Wallace and Gromits are 35mm. They were old Mitchell cameras generally. But I say Tom Barnes, who we brought in there, he'd worked in hire companies, so he had a lot of contacts. Managed to source eventually is about 40. Well, in fact, eventually we've got over 50 of them, Mitchell cameras. This is the old 35mm cameras that the mainstay of Hollywood for decades. Sourcing all these cameras and then having them upgraded. That was the other thing, because the early cameras we used elite light. They weren't all interchangeable with the lenses that we had, an odd assortment of lenses. But now we could afford to actually rebuild all these cameras. We did that. We got a consistent set of lenses, and we're talking mob-handed. You can't, because we knew we were going to be operating at least 20, and it turned out to be about 30 sets at one time. So you had to have at least 30 cameras, which is why we had about 40 of them to start with. We've since added to that, and all the subsequent lenses, a whole variety of lenses for each camera. It was a massive job, really. I mean, I'm very proud of what we actually achieved, and what we bought in. I mean, in terms of the choice of equipment, because we're still using a lot of it now. I mean, we made good choices, and we made a few bad choices of equipment, but we were sort of inventing it for ourselves, basing a lot of it on normal feature production, but we had, in a quite a different way, just because the sheer number of lights and cameras and very importantly, the way of rigging all these cameras and lights and doing motion control, because any camera movement has to be done one frame at a time and has to be computer controlled to be repeatable. Yeah, it was a big job, but it stood us in good stead, because we're still using this the same studio. We've expanded on it a lot since, but and a lot of the same sort of equipment.
And I'm making a sequel as well, which we'll talk about during the end of the interview.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about your long established working relationship with Nick Park, because you worked with him on 4 the Wallace and Gromit films, Early Man and Creature Comforts.
Yeah.
What's it been like working with Nick over many years? And what have you learned creatively from working with him?
Oh, stupendous. I love Nick. I mean, he's a genius. I mean, he's a brilliant storyteller. He's a great cartoonist. Yeah, he's a great designer, and he's got a fabulous sense of humor. I mean, Nick sort of came in about the same time as me. So when I started doing commercial work with Pete and Dave, just after that was when Nick joined us from the National Film and Television School. So yeah, we sort of came about the same time, and we got on quite well. I lent a bit of a hand on his first film, which he'd brought from the National Film School, The Grand Day Out, and finished at Ards. I gave a little hand on that. because he finished that off while he was doing commercials, basically, as we all were then in the early days. Yeah, it's inspirational because he's got a bit of his sense of humor. I remember very early on in the early studio, because I sat next to him and he's always drawing in his sketchbook there, and he put it down there, and I looked at this picture in the sketchbook, which was a penguin in a bottle. I thought, what a great image! It's a penguin with his head stuck out of a milk bottle, and I thought, well, what's that in aid of? And I thought, well, this will be a good gag for this film I'm working on, which of course is the wrong trousers. But I mean, that's where a lot of it came from. It's just from his ridiculous drawings. I mean, lovely stuff. And I learned from him. I don't know. We both shared a love of comics, especially the old British comics and that. And it's something that came to the fore in a lot of those early films. Is that sense of composition, that way of storytelling. It's quite a British thing, really. And it is based on and I love good composition. I mean, and so his little drawings, his original designs, the composition is beautiful. Things act themselves out within the frame. So that's one thing I really warm to. His love of bad puns. It's just constantly making bad puns all the while, which I think I've been accused of as well. It's a bit, resonated with that. But yeah, it's great storytelling. And it's very British as well. I mean, he finds the humor in everyday life. I mean, that's lovely. But he can then take it into extreme fantasy. And quite often that's fueled, I think, by something I sort of shared because of our age. I'm a little bit older than him, but it's like a love of old British comedy films and TV programs and genres. I mean, a lot of his films, he just steals genres, left, right, and centre. Whether it's going to be from Brief Encounters or Hammer Horror, all those things in there are in our collective memory, and I think that's why a lot of people love his films. There's something everybody can resonate to, everybody can recognize. And it's ideal to work with somebody like that for me, because, if he said, well, this is sort of slightly gothic horror, this sequence, he doesn't even have to say it. I mean, he'd done the drawings there. And I think, okay, this is sort of Hammer Horror. This has got this, this sort of feel to it. And generally, I've picked up on that. So, lovely person to work with.
I wanted to kind of come back a little bit full circle and kind of talk about photography. And we've obviously spoken about what an impression your father, who was a photographer, made on you.
Yeah.
But if we talk about cinematographers that have inspired your own work or have impressed you the most, who would they be? And would you ever like to work outside of animation and film a live action film? I know you mentioned you made a documentary, but would you like to make a live action fictional feature film movie?
I'd love to again, yeah. I mean, I did work on quite a lot in my freelance days in the early 80s, and especially one working with the university film unit, but I mean, that's very low level stuff. And I've done a couple of music videos which are more live action. But yeah, it's I mean, my inspiration was in terms of cinematography. I mean, it's people like Jack Cardiff. I adore Jack Cardiff's work. One of the early films I really resonated to as a kid, which was seen on television, was A Matter of Life and Death. That's not why we stole the title for one of Nick's films, but
stunning.
I just love that film. It's composition, it's color, its use of color and black and white. When I first saw it, obviously I wasn't thinking about who was the cinematographer, but yeah, subsequently I've been watching other Jack's films. I just love them, his use of color and things. And got to know Jack as well. Strangely enough, it was one of my heroes. Apparently he was a big fan of Morph. And this was about 15 years ago, or quite a while back. He came to visit Aardman's because he wanted to meet Morph. He said he basically wanted to see how animated films were made. So there's my hero turns up on the doorstep, and we got to know him quite well. Got invited to his birthday parties and all sorts of things. Fantastic chap, and he's got such an exciting history, really. But yeah, the films he's worked on. But there's other films. A film called Night of the Hunter. You know it.
With Robert Mitchum, Charles Lawton.
Yes, Charles Lawton directed. But Stanley Cortez who lit it. I mean, that film, when I first saw that, I thought, this is magical. This is like, because I was so aware of the cinematography in it there. It was, it's what I call poetic. I mean, some films, and it's something you can do quite easily with animation because you create everything. You have to create the backgrounds as well as the sky. It's all artifice. You can't really go on location. But that film is just full of this sort of strange poetic artifice of cut out backgrounds and false perspectives and use of shadows. Brilliant. I mean, it's one of those films that sort of made me really think about what you can do with the cinematography. It's Billy Williams, and of course our contemporary genius is Roger Deakins. I mean, the stuff he's doing is it's so varied and so wonderful. It's a pleasure to somebody is around today creating all that wonderful stuff.
I wanted to kind of steer away now from, we've spoken solely about kind of your film and animation career, and I kind of wanted to talk about life outside of your working life.
Yeah.
Because you're a family man, married to Rachel, and you've got 2 children, Charlie and Max.
Yeah.
What do your wife and children think about your work? And do your children want to follow, or have they followed in your footsteps? And what are your hobbies and interests away from working behind the lens?
Right. God, that's a lot. Yeah, that's a lot of things there. I mean,
sorry.
You could have to ask my wife, Rachel, what she thinks about what I do. I mean, I think she tolerates it very well. Working all sorts of hours on that. She still says I can't light the bloody house though. She says, well, you're supposed to be a lighting man there. She says the lighting in our sitting room is terrible.
That's great.
But yeah, my kids, I mean, I've got great kids. My son, Max, I don't think he ever showed any interest in going into film or that. He's a painter and decorator, does restoration work. What he is, he's a brilliant pianist. What I always wanted to be. I always had aspirations, but I could never practice. So I didn't force him to do it. We didn't force him to do it, but he took lessons quite early on, and he's a wonderful pianist. The pianist I always wanted to be. My daughter, circus performer. I mean, she skipped a generation. I think she took from my parents, my father's love of performing as well as designing things. She's and my mother's of costume making. She's sort of taken that on. So she's a circus performer, but currently, because of COVID, she wasn't actually getting a lot of circus work in the last 2 years. She's gone into doing a course in costume making now, because she was making a lot of costumes for fellow circus performers. So she's learned to do that properly now. So she's keeping on one family tradition there. Yeah, lovely kids. I'm proud of both of them. In terms of what I do in my spare time, I don't really have spare time, I don't think. I was trying to think about the other day. I do try and play a bit of music. I love music still. I still try and play a bit of guitar and keyboards now and then. I'm rubbish. I never really kept up practicing. But I do love it. I do love to make sounds, even if nobody else wants to hear them. I think one of the things I do in my spare time, I sort of realized the other day, is I still collect things. I'm an avid collector, where it's books. I still collect cameras, action figures.
Yeah, we can obviously see a lot of this.
I mean, that does drive my wife mad, really. She says, why have I got all this stuff everywhere? And it's not like expensive stuff. It's just I'm fascinated by things and objects and how things work. I always want to, if I see something and I'm not quite understanding, I think, how does that work? And I'll start collecting things to find out what the internal workings are of it. I think the other day I was restoring torches for some reason. I'd picked up an old maglite in a charity shop. I thought, I bet you get a better bulb of these now. And I was changed the bulb, and I thought, this is great. And I started collecting different sized maglites for some reason. I don't know why I suddenly needed some torches. But I just get fascinated by bits like that. So I suppose that some of my spare time is wasted. I'm bringing more objects into my house.
I'm going to ask you one final question. Before we move on to the final set of questions that we ask all Your Take guests. I totally get the collecting thing as well. I'm a hoarder myself. My wife
No, it's not
constantly gives
hoarding,
me.
it's curating.
I always say to her, a lot of this stuff will be worth a lot of money in in years to come, and you'll have a small gold mine, in the shed and up in the loft and under the floorboards or wherever you can store it. My final question: you're currently working as a senior lighting cameraman on the sequel to Chicken Run, which is called The Dawn of the Nugget. And later in the year, preparing filming for the new Wallace and Gromit feature, the sequel, of course. What can you tell us about these projects? Probably not a lot. Having worked in the industry for 40 plus years, do you still get excited by new projects? And do you ever have plans to retire?
Yes and no, no, yes. Yeah. One question at a time. I certainly have no plans to retire. I mean, I adore what I'm very lucky, and I adore what I'm doing. I'd be doing it if it wasn't my career, I suppose. I mean, it's in some form or another. I'm very lucky to be indulging myself in something I absolutely love. Coming up, I said, in terms of what I'm working on at the minute, Chicken Run 2 is, as you'd expect, it's not breaking out, it's breaking in. It's the same sort of story. The characters are great. I mean, I think the original characters are worthy of a recall, and they've done a very good job in the script on this one and in keeping those characters. But it's a big production, and I say I'm just a small part of it, really. I'm lighting several scenes in there, so I'm getting my rocks off on that without having to go to all the meetings, which is quite interesting. As a DOP, when you're actually heading up on something, is a hell of a lot of time spent in meetings and discussing things. Whereas, in fact, most of us cinematographers, all we want to do is get in there and light things, and actually just get on with it. However, having said that, I am really looking forward to Wallace and Gromit, which will start for me in a few months' time. So I shall actually jump ship on the current project to start the Wallace and Gromit. But I say I've seen the script so far, and it's fantastic. It's funny. I don't think anybody will be disappointed. And I say I'm really looking forward to working with the old guys again. And I thought maybe by this point I might have got bored of it, because I've done so many Shaun the Sheeps and so many Wallace and Gromits. You just wonder where you can take them to next. But I know there's more potential with Wallace and Gromit. But the project I finished recently, Robin, was great because it was quite a different style of lighting for me, a different style of different type of characters, different materials, a fresh canvas to paint on, really. The last film. And I don't know, have you seen the Robin one?
I've not seen it. That was like a Netflix.
It's a Netflix Christmas special. It's only half an hour, yeah. But I urge you to have a look, actually, because it is fairly different to as an Aardman's film. New directors. It was great fun working with quite a different sort of team. But some of the old Aard regulars working on it as well. But I'm very proud of that, really, because it's an opportunity to do something that's quite different. Having said that, Wallace and Gromit, looking forward to getting into their world again. I mean, it's something you absorb yourself. The whole process of making these films is sort of creating this alternative world. It isn't like realism. It's not. It doesn't obey the normal laws of live action filmmaking, etc. There's a certain look you have to achieve and maintain. And within that, I think Wallace and Gromit can come back to life again and keep us all happy.
Dave Riddett, we come to that moment where we've asked every single guest the same set of 13 quick fire questions to kind of finish the interview. You don't have to think about them in any detail. We just kind of want to find out maybe things we've not established so far in the interview. It's almost like something Freudian, isn't it? This part.
Yes, it's in the psychiatrist's chair.
Literally.
I may never work again after this.
So here we go, Dave Borthwick. First one, what would you say is your favourite pastime?
Well, I think the collecting things, really, yeah. I love music. I love listening to music. I love playing music. But yeah, and I like rescuing stuff from obscurity.
This interview has been filled with film and influences. We mentioned some tremendous filmmakers and cinematographers, but if you had to choose your favorite film, what would it be and why?
Oh God, that's hard. A Matter of Life and Death. I also love performance, Nick Roke's performance, and Night of the Hunter I mentioned. I mean, even Citizen Kane. I mean, all those films I love for different reasons. And a film I keep watching over and over again is The Big Lebowski. Just so well scripted. Yeah, I mean, I can't say a favorite film. There are lots of, I mean, there are lots of films I watch over and over again, and I say those films I mentioned. I mean, performance I watch them at least once a year, I think. Anything Fellini films, Ken Russell, The Devils.
I love Fellini.
Fellini films, yeah, magnificent sort of way of capturing memories and collecting faces. Again, this is another thing I come from my father's love of portraiture, and that is just he collects portraits in effects and puts them into films. Yeah. Yeah, no one film. I just spend a day watching those films over and over again, one after the other.
The creme de la creme of cinema there, and I must admit it did amuse me. I interviewed another cameraman whose favourite film was Citizen Kane, and when I mentioned
was that David
Orson Welles, David Worth.
Yeah, Worth, yeah.
Yeah, and his face lit up, and it was quite tremendous to see him speaking about his love of Wells and Stanley Kubrick. I found it quite
Kubrick films,
it was interesting.
There's so much good stuff out there.
From some great world cinema, some great choices, now to novelists. Who would you say is your favourite writer?
I would say this is a bland answer. It's like Dickens. I still read Dickens stuff and Sherlock Holmes stories, Conan Doyle. Yeah, I still like dipping into them. I mean, I don't actually dip into novels that much, really. I mean, but the Dickens stuff is. I mean, I collect a lot of books. Again, I even collect books about collecting books. But a lot of the books are sort of reference books, and I love dipping into into autobiographies and biographies, and how things were invented, or social history of things. But not so much novels these days. I mean, that's and the history of magic. I've got a large collection of books about magicians and that. A guy called Jim Steinmeier is a particular favourite, who beautifully tells the story of the magicians from Victorian to Edwardian days. It almost like a novelistic approach.
Dave, if you could have chosen a different profession, what would it have been?
I would love to have been a competent musician. I know I never really practiced enough, but I love listening to music. I like to disentangle that by actually playing them as well. But I'd love that. Or even as well, a magician. Again, I collect a lot of stuff to do with magic, but I'm a useless performer of it because I don't practice at all. Again, but a magician, a musician, anything big any of them.
I share your sentiment for music. I'm a kind of frustrated wannabe musician. I would have loved to have been a songwriter performing on stage, but dream on, I think. I think I know what your answer is going to be for this next one, but interested to find out who in life has been your greatest inspiration.
Yes, my dad. my original inspiration. It's my dad, really, I think, Just his attitude to life, and he was a talented guy, but basically he never made any money out of his dad. He just made sure he enjoyed himself by indulging himself in it. And I think that's a great, that's an inspiring thing to have, really, is that belief that you can actually just, it's okay to enjoy yourself doing what,
Is your dad still alive, or
no? Sadly, he died in 2008. He lives on him, in my memory and my work, I think. I still consult him in my head when I'm doing something. What would he have done, or what would he have said about that?
We move on to newspapers. Do you read a newspaper, and if so, which one?
Not much these days. I mean, in the old days when I said something like The Guardian, or I mean, probably the only thing I read these days is the Evening Post, just just for you know, for local stuff there. I mean, what I read more than anything is things like Private Eye. I do read The Week, because there's that sort of collected magazine called The Week, which has a good rundown of sort of current news stories, etc., written in a quite a sensible, unbiased way, generally unbiased. But yeah, I think most of my information comes from Private Eye. Occasionally, the Eye newspaper, I find it quite condensed, but yeah. I haven't really got time. There's too much information coming in. I'm not sure if, I want, I mean, they say I used to like The Guardian, but yeah, again, it's just too much information really these days. I certainly don't avoid the right-wing rags.
We talk food. Do you like cooking? And also, what is your favorite food?
I like food. I don't really cook. My wife's a wonderful cook. So I really enjoy her meals, but end of the day, I love things like fish and chips. I mean, old traditionalist. I love Fishy Friday. My daughter comes and joins us with fish and chips. So.
Yeah, my kids are like that, always on a Friday. This next one kind of stumps most guests, but we always ask them to choose a favorite cultural icon. It could be maybe someone who's changed and revolutionized the way of life, maybe a designer, maybe a political figure. Who would you choose?
Right. I think going back, like Leonardo da Vinci, I'm fascinated by such a person does exist, especially at that time. I mean, fabulous painter. Or a designer as well. I mean, an investigator. I mean, he did some remarkable things. For that age. I mean, I always resonated with any tales of Da Vinci and what he did, and looking at his drawings and his sketchbooks and his notebooks.
I think that's an interesting choice, and someone who did so much. And the word genius is kind of overused, but I think Da Vinci probably was no question, without doubt, a genius and well ahead of his time, I think. Yeah. Incredible sort of the things he kind of achieved. Yeah, in his life. We talk about curse words. What is your favorite? What is your favorite curse word and why?
That's an easy one. I mean, I quite often do. I mean, working in animation is it's quite a bit of frustration every now and things go wrong, or something happens. I mean, I'm quite often heard me saying, "Oh, for fuck's sake!" It's become my sort of mantra, really. I think.
When you do get the chance to escape the reality of animation and that kind of the time process and life behind the lens, what is your favorite place or holiday destination?
A very favorite place is California. I mean, only because since the early 90s, we were spending so much time going out to the States, partly for films we'd made, but partly, as I said, to actually buy equipment, and used to go to LA every year for a decade or so, just to go to the trade shows, whatever. We got quite like Santa Monica, Venice Beach. So that's that's my regular home from home, I think, when I go abroad. Other places, I quite like going to Turkey. I've been to Dalian recently, but not a big travel other than that. And apart from going to film festivals, I mean, we go to lots of trade shows all around the world, but lots of film festivals.
Have you got a favourite film?
Annecy to Stuttgart to Frankfurt.
Have you got a favourite?
It's always interesting
festival?
to go to somebody else's country and to talk to other filmmakers. Really, to have that shared interest. But
do you have a favourite film festival?
No, I used to quite enjoy Annecy for a while. Stuttgart was always interesting because quite often you can give a little talk there. Again, I think it's just the people as well as the country, really. Just especially people from a slightly different culture, to see what they're doing, and they're interested in what we were doing, and we're interested in what they're doing. But yeah, my regular go-to place is sort of Santa Monica, Venice Beach.
We come back to music. Who would you say is your favorite music artist, and what is your favorite album?
Again, very difficult because I love so many of them, really. I didn't say. I mean, currently there's people. There's a Norwegian band called Jager Jazzist. If you ever come across them, it's a contemporary sort of jazz band. Fantastic stuff. In fact, a lot of good music coming out of Norway. I like. There's a duo from Canada, Elsian, a girl singer and a drummer. Do some fantastic stuff. Just very unusual. I mean, that's the current thing I listen to. But this, in general, is Zappa, Yellow. A lot of my old favourites from the 60s. Arthur Brown. I was a big fan of Crazy World of Arthur Brown. In fact, one of my favourite LPs was, it wasn't the Crazy World, it's his second band, Kingdom Come. There's a thing called Galactic Zoo Dossier. It just came at a certain point in my life. I used to just play it over and over when I was in my late teens, and I used to love it. And I still play it now. As I do sort of Crazy World, its original stuff. I like a lot of classicals, like Prokofiev, Stravinsky, Debussy. Romeo and Juliet is one of my favourite pieces. Prokofiev's, apart from the fact that it was stolen as the theme tune for The Apprentice. It was one of my Desert Island LPs. If I could take something with me, I would take that. It's got so much in it. It rocks off on it. But Gentle Giant. Remember a band called Gentle Giant?
No, not at all.
No, they're sort of late 60s, early 70s. I was a big fan of theirs and still play their stuff. I mean, Kate Havnevik, Norwegian singer. There's a host of them. I wouldn't like to say that anyone was a favourite, because I do go through stages of playing certain ones to death, and then occasionally I discover something new. There's an Australian band called King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, who I love just because they're such a spontaneous gang of musicians, all excellent musicians. They're just an amazing output. I think they've got about 20 LPs out there, but I discovered them recently and I just love their enthusiasm for playing. And Spongle, did we come across Spongle? Sort of acid rave sort of band.
No.
I mean, I suppose in my formative years, psychedelia was a big thing. I was a big fan of it, the psychedelic bands. And
we come on to the last two now. What would you say is your greatest achievement to date?
Well, I have to say it's my kids, really. I mean, actually having growing your own friends. When my son was about to be born, Max, my firstborn, I asked my dad, who wasn't much versed in philosophy or anything like that. I said, "Dad, what's it like having kids?" And he thought about it and he came back. He says, "It's all right. It's like growing your own friends." And I thought, that's a great thing. And I thought that's how I felt being brought up by my parents. They were friends as well as as parents. And I thought, well, hopefully I'll be able to grow my own friends. And I think I've done that. My kids are great characters. I mean, I think that's a good achievement. I haven't fucked them up, I hope. I mean, got good kids. That's the best achievement. Although I must say as well, recently I got invited to join the British Society of Cinematographers. I mean, talk about acknowledgement from your peers. That's I was well chuffed with that. Because working in animation, it does feel a bit like a niche part of the film industry, but to be recognised by people in the proper film industry, if you like, but my heroes, I think I feel that's great.
And then lastly, Dave Riddett, the final question: how do you wish to be remembered?
I don't know. I shall hope people as somebody who's enjoyed this wonderful life that we've been thrown into, and hopefully, I mean, I think I'm lucky in as much as that a lot of the films I worked on do seem to be appreciated. They get shown enough. So hopefully be remembered for that, for bringing a bit of joy to people's life in terms of creating a picture that somebody else enjoys looking at. But I mean, I feel very lucky that I can enjoy this life, and hopefully you can contribute to it.
It's an incredible CV and a body of work that it's already lasted the course of time, and I think it will last even longer. And it's just been a fascinating conversation, listening to all the things you've done. And I think what shone through the most in the interview is you come across so passionate about what you do, and everything in your life has pretty much been creative, from whether it's been as a cameraman, whether it's your love of music as well, and performance, magic. You've mentioned so many kind of creative areas, and obviously your kids are now following in those footsteps as well. So thank you kindly. And one thing we also didn't mention was one of the highlights, the Mark Commode Award.
Ah, yes, my favourite award.
Yeah, I love her a film as well. But thank you very much for taking part in the interview. It's been nice to kind of reconnect with you, because many years ago we did a talk, a long time ago. So nice to talk again, and I wish you all the very best with everything, and of course the 2 feature films, of course.
Yeah. Well, thank you, James. It's been it's been interesting. It's been great fun.
And then lastly, how do we find out more about you and your work? Where do we go? Where do we see kind of as well the old Bolex films that I love so much?
You can see them. I have a website, which probably imaginatively is called davealexriddett.com. Yeah, you can access that. They're on there. There's a section, Alchemists of Light and Wonder, would you believe? Which I've got a lot of the old films, and there's an archive section as well. I think there's some of the old Bolex Brothers films in there. Sadly, not very good copies. I mean, at the time, most of our stuff has actually existed on pneumatic or VHS tape, so it's not the best quality, but I think you'll get the gist of what we're trying to achieve. But there's all sorts of things in there, including behind the scenes stuff. I used to try and record behind the scenes making of some of the movies, the Shaun the Sheep and the I think there's a bit of Early Man on there. Certainly the Wallace and Gromit one, the Loaf and Death. So yeah, have a look on there.
And then once again, thank you for this evening, and again wishing you all the very best for the future.
Correct. Thank you, James. It's been a pleasure.